savage world, strange as a weird war. It's a savage world, classics to explore. It's a savage world in the land of the dead.
All right, hey everybody, it's Carl with Eric.
Hello.
And we're back to talk about Pathfinder for Savage Worlds again. See, we promised. We promised deep dives. We mean it.
We
did. We promised that. So
that last video was not a deep dive. That was a, for us, that was not a deep dive. That was a surface level, initial impression, skim. Now we're really going to get into it, go through each of the new features, each of the new systems. I mean, really get into it and give our opinions. And then let's do a little bit of housekeeping at the front, Carl. I think there was a couple of points we wanted to address.
Absolutely.
Just
go
initially, number one, we correcting a mistake from last time.
Oops.
Yes. When we were talking about cantrips, we said that you had to spend a PowerPoint just to use it, and that's not actually correct. You only spend a PowerPoint when you have a critical failure. Now, that was just a mix-up because in the 1.0 version, that was the rule that you had to spend a PowerPoint. So if just between the 1.0 and the 1.1, like we thought we had read everything and gone over everything, but that was just something that we missed. So in one way, it kind of gives me hope that, you know, a lot of the issues that we might bring up could very well be corrected. I mean, they did a really good job just between 1.0 and 1.1. So I think our plan is in the future when they're like, you know, print this PDF, then we'll have like just a kind of a shorter, kind of just very quick review, our final review on the whole system. Just like a final book.
Yeah, just an update on it. Yep, sure.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the second thing is that after we recorded it, we kind of felt like we maybe came off as too harsh. That really was not our impression. I think we just want to reinstate that there's a lot of stuff to love here. We like a lot of it. There's some stuff that we definitely felt improvement, and most of that was like the formatting, like we've talked about, which could very well be fixed. So, you know, we tend to get very passionate about this. So, and I'm very dramatic of a person, so I might come off as harsher. I don't really mean to. I definitely overall feel like this is a good product, but it might not be for everyone. And that's what we're trying to kind of give people that. Did you have anything else that you want to touch on?
No, I think you hit the main points. We made a mistake, and we're coming clean on that. There'll be a link to the first video if you haven't seen it yet, and so you'll hear our mistake in the first video, and we will do maybe an update based on the final rev, because this is rev 1.1 we're talking about, and that could change, as Eric said. I don't want to spend a lot of time without further ado, so to speak. Let's go ahead and let's talk about what are the key things we're trying to look at. We're going to talk a little bit about the skills and some of the changes there. Yeah. We're going to talk about Ancestries. We're going to talk about the class edges as those define the classes. And then, we'll see where time takes us. But that's probably more than enough to fill the time we have allotted.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are some of the bigger changes. So, cool. So just going into this, like, I think we're going to be looking at this as both from the perspective of the playing experience of Pathfinder in Savage Worlds, like how well represented are these things in this compared to the Pathfinder 1, and then also just how well do they play as just a game. I know Carl's looking at this more of not really wanting to play Pathfinder, but just looking at this as a fantasy companion almost for Savage Worlds.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking at it as, my opportunity to run some fantasy games, leveraging these new rules, and not just necessarily Pathfinder.
We'll talk about both of those things when we're giving our opinion, because I think basically the audiences are kind of split probably. That you might look at this to, I really want to play I love Pathfinder lore, I love their setting, so it'd be great to play with Savage Worlds rules, or there's some other people that just want to have fantasy in Savage Worlds. So we'll kind of give our opinions for both. So let's get right into it. So the first thing coming up is Ancestries. Now, it's very interesting that they do say, this is another kind of upfront thing, that this is all for 1E. All of the APs, the adventure paths, are 1E adventure paths. So they said this is all like 1E, but there's definitely 2E influences in here that I've seen scattered. Just up at the front, Ancestries. In 1E, they did call it races, I believe. And that's what they call it in Savage Worlds. They changed that name to Ancestries, I think, for kind of just more to be politically correct, I think, maybe, or just kind of change the way you look at it. I'm not really sure why, but I think that's the reason behind it. So you already kind of see some of the 2E influences there. But yeah, let's get right into it. So they have the core, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the core 7 Ancestries. This is the core Ancestries that you would get if you bought the original Pathfinder 1E core book.
And they're kind of the classic fantasy trope.
Yeah.
Ancestries, races, what have you.
Classic fantasy trope. So again, we're going to start getting into this, and we're going to be looking at both from the perspective of how well represented it is, but from Pathfinder 1E and as just a fantasy game. So let's talk about it. Dwarves.
The good old classic dwarves.
Classic dwarves.
Very much the classic dwarf. Yeah.
They have some very interesting... These actually pictures were from the 1E book, Carl. So they like to show these ancestries basically just in their undies, almost naked. For whatever reason, you need to see how their body hair is grown, I guess. This is not the case in 2E anymore, but they kind of brought this over. I'm going to loosen up a little bit from the 1E art.
Chill out.
So,
You're talking games here,
Gotta get cash. So the first thing you'll know, and Carl might show some of these a little bit, but the first thing you'll see is that languages, I mean, they're all going to have common, but there's these racial languages, which will come up later when we talk about that. But so some of these will have common, and then they're kind of their ancestral language. So dwarves get that Dwarven. Now here's the first big change. This is a very big change, and I don't know if you saw about this, but they get dark vision. Now, a big change that happened with the whole book is that infravision, I think, is gone. At least in the bestiary here, I didn't see it listed. So now we have low light, dark vision, and night vision. None of the ancestries will have night vision. This is a kind of an interesting change. Now, overall, I think they did a very good job on the ancestries. This one I'm a little bit on the fence about. Another thing I forgot to mention, Carl, is that the base ancestries, Savage Worlds base races use points, and they generally always, all the races are balanced around a +2 positive.
Because that's where the humans get their free edge, right?
Yeah, all of these ancestries are actually balanced around a +4 positive. So the ancestries in this are actually more powerful than normal Savage Worlds equivalents. I don't know if you saw that, Carl, but that seems to be the case.
Well, it certainly seemed like there was a lot more, I don't know, edges or racial modifiers than you had.
There's some new ones.
Yeah.
Just because in Pathfinder 1E, the races have a lot of stuff going on. So this is not actually even like a lot of them are just left out. Dwarves is a really good example of that. Dwarves actually have a ton of like specific, like they hate giants and they get all the other bonuses. So they definitely went with the things that they left out were kind of those setting specific things like hatred against giants, stuff like that. Because they just couldn't include everything, which I think was really good because this made it better to use as like a generic system.
Right.
But here's the first big change. So as I said, there's low light, dark vision, and night vision. Low light's the same. So low light in Savage Worlds is you ignore penalties for dim and dark, but not pitch dark. This new trait is called dark vision, where you ignore all illumination penalties. So you ignore, but only within 10 inches.
Right.
Which is interesting. So here's what I throw to you, Carl, is that this actually doesn't, and I'm just because of the way it's written, and also because when I did the math on all of these, just to make it equal, like dark vision seems to be a 1-point racial ability, which is the same as low light, is that they don't actually have low light vision. So this is very different from how Pathfinder is in that, if you're outside of 10 inches and it's dark, they're pretty much, they get those full penalties. Where somebody who has low light vision doesn't, because there's no restriction on the amount of inches. Right. So this was this specific thing I didn't really thought was that good. I mean, it's almost fine. I mean, I don't know your opinion from
it's 10
just
inches.
A straight fantasy.
So I mean, that's
it's a good distance.
That's a long distance in interior. It may be a problem outside, obviously, but 10 inches is pretty far when you're talking dungeons, rooms.
But down a dungeon hallway, or when you look at ranged attacks, if somebody has a bow, that might become an issue.
Right, that's true. Sure.
But so in Pathfinder 1E, there isn't any restriction. There's low light vision, and then there's dark vision, and dark vision is just the better way of low light vision. So
they
in
put
this
a constraint
case,
on this one.
Yeah, so I wouldn't actually say that dark vision is necessarily better. I mean, it's better within 10 inches. But once you get outside the 10 inches, it's much worse.
Right.
So
Right.
that's an interesting tack that they went with. So just from you think this is good just from a generic fantasy?
Oh, I think so, for sure.
Okay, you like this?
I
having
actually,
the two
well, I
things?
don't like dark vision or low light vision in general, because man, does it make it
Really?
hard to run a game when you have. Well, some need torches, some don't. But that's neither here nor there with respect to the races. That's just personal.
That's just your own opinion.
Yeah, it makes it too hard to run, different things. Somebody needs a torch, somebody doesn't. Somebody can see, somebody can't. You're putting a dungeon together on a virtual tabletop, and you can't put walls in, or you can't do the lighting because somebody can see. It just gets a nightmare. But anyway.
But there's also, I mean, even besides the map Mishigas, there's also just like mechanical things, right? Like if somebody's in dim light, I just really spaced out on what Savage Worlds does with that, but what is it? You have a minus to hit, right? You have -2 per level. So that's even if you had like just used Fog of War on the map, you'd still have those things going on. So this is the first big change. We'll move on now. But this was like a bunch of these races you'll see either have low light or dark vision. I think only humans are the only ones that don't have either. So this was a big leap. Yeah.
So then Iron Constitution, is that something that was that's a Pathfinder thing, or is that a new?
It is. I mean, they kind of combined it. Pathfinder has like sturdy or something. So this is kind of, I mean, they're very much abstracting it. I think they did a kind of a good job. Once you read it through, I'll look up dwarves.
This is so Iron Constitution. You have +1 from resisting poison, and +1 when resisting or recovering from powers or abilities that state they work like a power.
Yeah, so this is almost directly from Pathfinder 1E. 1E that have they get resistances, they get pluses to poison. They also get pluses to like spells and all this other stuff.
Okay.
So this is pretty much straight from it. Obviously, the bonuses are different, but this is just straight dwarf.
Well, yeah, because remember, and I don't know Pathfinder, but in Savage Worlds, a +1 is a pretty significant thing. So
Pathfinder too. I mean, it is. So
okay, and then
reduced pace. That's a very classic dwarf thing. Stone cunning. Reduced pace -1 to their pace, and the die takes a running die takes a lower one. Stone cunning is an interesting one. That's almost directly taken from Pathfinder 2. +2 is a free action.
So do you ever use notice as a non-free action when people are in the heat of something? Do you go, oh, you're noticing, that's an action? I don't know if I ever do that anyway. So
it's a little weird. I mean, maybe in combat, if you're trying to, if it's in combat, so you were like, is there a secret door around here or something? I guess that'd be an action, but
I don't know.
For sure, it almost seemed like it should be as a automatic action, like they get +2 and also, a like free notice roll.
Right.
If there's a trap, that's a stone trap or something. That's how I would play it, honestly.
So it's almost like that passive perception in that regard. If you played it that way.
Only in stone, though.
Right.
Which is actually what it is in Pathfinder. So here's actually a tweak that I would do is that make it so they get that +2 on a notice roll and they get like a free roll, kind of like Danger Sense, basically, for hidden doors or traps if it's within 10 feet.
Give them a reroll too. Okay.
I don't know about a reroll, but
I thought that's what you said. I'm sorry, my bad.
Oh no, sorry, no. So that's another little tweak that I would do because I don't really see.
Okay, I hear
why. And then they finally get a upgrade to their vigor. So overall, I feel like dwarves are extremely thematic. I actually do like a lot what they do. Dark vision aside, which I'm not kind of the biggest fan of the way they did it, just because. In Pathfinder, there's no negative to having dark vision versus low light, where in this, you might want low light if you were an archer versus dark vision. I don't know. So that's kind of a wash for me there. But otherwise, I kind of really like, dwarves are going to be like the slow but kind of very hardy and that connection to the earth with stone cutting. So if I had to rate them as far as the representation, I would give it a 5 and probably a 4 just generally.
You mean rate it with its representation as it applies to
from Pathfinder
1.0?
Yeah. Okay. And what's your feeling? You like these? You thought they did a good job?
No, I think
overall?
They did a fine. Like I said, it's a classic dwarf trope. If I think dwarf, they can, from early D&D on, they can see stone, stone traps, stone changes. All that stuff is pretty.
Yeah, that's carried
pretty standard
over.
trope. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to elves.
Your favorite.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Well, at least you had more complaints about it before, I thought, but or more.
Oh no!
concerns,
Before I thought they were more powerful. Now, again, I've kind of gone through everything in my head, and we'll talk about this. So everything's supposed to end up at that net positive 4 plus 4. Right. And so there's some new traits here that were kind of hard to quantify. But so I'll run through really quick, and then we'll talk about it. Elves get an increase to their agility. By 1 step, also increases the maximum agility.
Yep.
Elves get something where this is very much how Pathfinder is, where enemy arcane energies take a -2 to hit them. This is very different from the edge of the kind of similar vein, where it's just the -2 to hit. There's no damage negative, but also it's just enemy rolls. They get an increase to intelligence, another increase. And the maximum. Low light vision. So they get low light. They don't have that dark vision. Keen senses. They get an increase to their notice by 1 step. And then they're slender. So slender is -1 toughness and -1 to vigor rolls. So all vigor rolls take a -1 and -1 to toughness. Now, if we go through here, the only way for this to end up at that net positive of 4, as I did the math, Elven magic would be equal to a +1 racial modifier. But in my mind, it's almost worth a +2, just because there's an edge that pretty much does the same thing.
So it's kind of a 1.5, because doesn't the edge have more to it?
The edge does have more to. So the interesting thing is, so the normal Savage Worlds arcane resistance, which is what we're talking about, it's -2 to hit you with powers, and magical damage takes that reduced damage. But in the normal Savage Worlds, they clearly state that that's also ally powers. So if somebody wanted to buff you, they take that -2. Here, they don't bring it up, so I'm not sure if what's the final product, if that's going to be the same case.
So there's a plus, there's a minus, but then there's kind of,
there's a drawback a little bit.
Yeah.
But now the arcane resistance in this document doesn't have that drawback. I'm not sure if that's a typo or not. If it is a typo, then to me, this element of magic is equal to a just normal edge because it doesn't have that drawback. So overall, I think elves they did it again. They did a really good job coming from Pathfinder 1E. That was kind of like their main traits. What do you think as far as just like a race?
I think they're. If it weren't for the -1 toughness and a -1 vigor, they seem like they were a little
they're
higher power,
yeah.
because they essentially get bumps on a number of ability scores and capabilities, and so you have to spend less to bump your ability scores up, which then makes skills cheaper overall, and so it seemed like they. But then -1 toughness is a big deal. -1 toughness is a big deal.
And a -1 to vigor. It's like soak rolls. So it's definitely because I think in the elf racial traits, they have a -2 to constitution. As one of their that's like their racial traits. And I think that they pretty much did like they needed to give them more negatives to balance everything out to represent them, and so they just went full hog on this. So I would say even more so than Pathfinder 1E, elves are not going to be good as any type of frontline character. They're definitely going to want to stick with being a archer and with being a mage or the combination, which is generally how they kind of are seen in 1E. But even more so, I would say it's going to come out even more in this because that -2 to Constitution is not as bad in 1E.
I don't think elves were ever used as tanks, anyway.
They can be, and especially in 1E, they could be used more. I think in this, it's just even more, just because the nature of how Savage Worlds is, right?
Right.
They're really going to be taking it. They don't want to be soaking rolls. They don't want to be. You can overcome this, but that -1 to vigor, just that -1 to soak rolls, is just bad. That's hard to overcome, honestly.
Right.
They definitely seem more shoehorned than in Pathfinder 1E.
Okay.
Let's move on to gnomes.
Gnomes. I like gnomes.
Gnomes are fun. They're very interesting. Again, we're not going to bring up lore. So gnomes get actually extra 2 languages. They get Gnome and Sylvan, just so you know that in Pathfinder, gnomes are actually linked to the Fae, not elves. Yeah. Which is something just for anybody out there who's not familiar with Pathfinder. That's why they would get Sylvan. So cool. So gnomes get no magic.
Love that.
They get cantrips.
That's cool.
This is an interesting thing, and that's very similar to the ones in Pathfinder had like spell-like abilities, which some of them I believe were cantrips, but some were like a first level spell that they could just use once a day. So this is a little different. So they get light, sound, telekinesis, and beast friends.
Beast friends.
Using their smarts or their arcane skill. They have 1 power point. Now here's a this shows that we weren't wrong, Carl. Is that here's kind of a typo, I think, that they said they have 1 power point for activating these cantrips. Well, in this edition, you don't actually have to spend the power point to activate it. You just, on a critical failure, you would be able to use that power point in place of getting fatigue for once. So that's pretty interesting.
Right. So I guess I read this going back to us fixing our misunderstanding. Mm-hmm. I read this as they can use cantrips until they get during the day until they get a critical failure.
Yeah. Which they would then spend that 1 power point.
Right.
And they could still do it. They could still spend these cantrips, but they'd be risking fatigue. So again, I think cantrips are probably the biggest, like, doesn't quite fit Savage Worlds, really. I mean, again, we're still on the fence about it. We'll have to see how it plays. But, I mean, even right here, this is an example of it quite kind of being the weirdest crossover from Pathfinder to here. I still think it's cool.
Yeah, I think this makes Gnomes cool. Yeah.
It makes Gnomes cool. I mean, they almost could have done this a little bit. Like, in Pathfinder 1e, they have a beast. Basically, they can talk to beasts as the spell, but it's like once per day. In this, kind of beast friend becomes a cantrip. The only thing that's kind of I guess different is that everybody who has beast friend can do this. Like, this isn't totally that unique, but I don't know.
But they're not casting beast friend, right?
No, they're not.
It's a cantrip, which is using those powers as kind of a base for that small thing that you can do, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do like that they gave. So we're talking a lot about the specific thing, but that 1 power point is actually added to your power pool. So if you have most of those powers, it's kind of you're still getting something.
Nice.
They
got low light vision as well.
They have low light. Yeah.
Keen senses that gives them a D6 notice. So I notice everybody's getting bonuses and notice.
The elves and the gnomes, get that keen senses, and then whenever there's a specific increase to an trait, your maximum also increases to that being able to be +1. That's something to note. Obsessive, they get a D4 in any smart skill. They have the reduced pace drawback. They have a -1 size. So here's again where Savage Worlds doesn't quite fit the Pathfinder 1e, where in Pathfinder 1e, you don't really have a negative to being small in that way. There's some other negatives, but it's not really like your toughness. You're not really weaker in that way. Because then they also have tough, which increases their vigor. So this is where I feel like I don't know. I guess there was no getting around this because Savage Worlds has such a strict size, thing already in it. But this is kind of the weirdest thing where they have a size -1 where they take a reduction to their toughness, but then they also have tough, which increases their vigor, which increases their toughness by 1. I mean, it also helps with stuff like soaking, but it's kind of just like a wash almost. So what do you feel? What do you feel about this? What do you feel about gnomes overall?
I think gnomes overall are, and I've got a special place in my heart for them because almost every gnome player I had was always a illusionist because I just loved it. But so I think this is a very interesting character ancestry that looks like it'd be a lot of fun to play. I do get kind of confused a little bit about it. Like you said, they're tougher, yet they're smaller, so they're not as tough. And so I have to see how that pans out, whether it's a net positive, net negative, how it works out for that. But, I mean, otherwise it's the trope I expected, other than no magic is kind of a Pathfinder thing that was added. And
it's interesting. I mean, this is really, like, I think there's just no getting around the size stuff. And this was kind of the in Pathfinder 1e, being small actually gives you a bonus to your armor class and to attack rolls. And the gnome's negatives are in strength. So it definitely doesn't really fit that way. But there's just no getting around it because the size things are so just part of Savage Worlds that if you took that out, it would be a huge issue.
Right. I agree. We got to, still got to stick with kind of the core mechanics even as they change things. Yeah.
There's only so much you can stretch it. So, from a Pathfinder, from a Pathfinder side, I guess this is okay. If you're just playing this as a fantasy, it might come off as weird that they were given tough, and no reduction in strength. But what are you going to do? Cool. Half-Elves. I'm just going to run through this, and I'm going to give this is actually the ancestry that I have the biggest problem with, and I'll explain why.
Ooh, have a problem. All right.
So, and I love Half-Elves, but Half-Elves have they did really good except for one thing: adaptability.
D6 and anything.
D6 and anything, but when there's a D6 and anything, this doesn't increase the attribute maximum. You just get to start a D6 and an attribute. They have the same Elven Magic trait, where it's at -2 to spell or powers affecting them. Low light vision. They also get keen senses. And then here's where I have the biggest issue: is the outsider minor hindrance that they're given. Generally,
like
let's just
setting. Yeah.
Let me just push outsider minor. So generally, half-elves are a mix of humans and elves. You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, I
By
thought
definition.
you were giving me a symbol. Yeah. So they did. I thought they did really well, giving them the adaptability, giving them that elven magic and the low light vision. But here's where I have the issue. No matter if it's Pathfinder or if it's a different game, I really don't think the outsider minor fits. When you read the lore of half-elves, like, some of them have this problem, but it's kind of a self-imposed hindrance. It's not really like, sometimes even in Pathfinder it might be an issue if you're like in a certain elven society, but generally it's not really the case everywhere. People aren't everywhere like, oh, look at that that dirty mix of human and elf. Like, it really isn't a thing that's in a lot of settings.
Blood.
Yeah, and it's really not a thing in like most custom settings. That would be a very specific setting thing. And and when you actually even read the lore of Pathfinder, it's more of a psychological thing on their own. To me, I would just get rid of this, and I would just pretty much get rid of keen senses. Just make it a wash.
I don't I don't like outsider minor for any race because it makes an assumption, right? Because I'm thinking about, well, this would be great for fantasy in general, but you have that in other settings, right? Where there's outsider minor for automatons and something. It depends on the how you're going to play the game. The force that. Yeah. So I would switch something in and out. Maybe just require them to take another minor hindrance. I thought of that. Yeah.
So yeah, as a good tweak, I think that's a really good one, Carl. Is just say it's any minor hindrance. Another one that you could do is, like I said, is just get rid of keen senses and then get rid of outside and minor, and then you're at that net positive of 4, like I talked about. Adaptability being 2,
let the player
magic
decide.
being 1, low light being 1.
Let the player decide how much of human versus how much of
that's true. Yeah,
they have in them, and they're like, okay, well, I am going to have glow light vision.
Well, the problem is that adaptability. Adaptability is the human side. That's actually a 2-point racial trait. So you couldn't really get rid of that. So
no, I was talking more like low vision, low light vision, or elven magic, keen senses, or elven, something like that.
That's true. So just get rid of outsider minor, and then let them get rid of, just side on one of those to get rid of. That's a good idea.
If it makes sense for your setting, that'd be cool.
Yeah, if it makes sense for your setting, and I would even say even for Pathfinder, that still should be the case, because in Pathfinder it's more of a, if you were brought up that way of having that issue, then it's a thing that you should just take on your own. But the other weird thing is that half-elves are often known to be like very charismatic, which kind of goes right in the face of that. So this is, out of all the things that we've talked about, this is just the worst. This is the worst one, I think, by far, and kind of a total miss. And I hope they do change this by either getting rid of it or just saying that half-elves, because of their mixed races, have just an extra minor hindrance. Like that, I'm fine with. So either of the two things that we said is a good fix, I think.
Yeah.
It's an easy fix.
That's a house. I think that's a house ruling. Knowing that they've used that outsider minor in other areas, in other books and that sort of thing. I'm assuming they're going to keep it. That this isn't something that's going to play test.
I really hope they don't,
know.
because to me this is just a huge miss here. This does not fit the lore of Pathfinder. This should not fit the lore of even how they've described half-elves. This is like they said.
Speaking of half,
anyways, moving on to half-orcs. Now, it's interesting because half-orcs are also a mix of human and orcs, but here I don't mind, so we'll run through it. They have dark vision, which we've talked about. They have intimidating, which they get that increase to intimidation and the maximum. They have outsider minor. Orc ferocity, they get a +1 to toughness, and strong, they get that bonus to strength. Overall, I actually do really like this. Now, here, outsider minor fits Pathfinder, at least, Carl, because because here, at least in Pathfinder 1E, orcs are very much not trusted, and within orc society, the human side would often not be trusted. So here again, I actually do think it fits here for Pathfinder 1E, but I think for us talking about, if your setting is different, just go with the same thing of just getting rid of intimidating or getting rid of dark vision. Just right. one of the other things, or just having
this does follow
it's an easy
trope
fix.
Pretty well. Yeah. Okay.
Now,
cool.
So again, for Pat, I think they actually think here they did a really good job. So the orcs are the very, very tough, and we've kind of forgot to start rating these, but I don't think we need to really rate these. Ancestries,
but
right?
That's our thing. No,
we'll rate the class. We'll rate the class edges, but I think
I think that's more appropriate. Yeah.
I think here, I think half orcs are a good one, and they're kind of fit that trope. Moving on to halflings. Do you want to read through it?
They have agile, which gives them a D6 in agility instead of D4. Keen senses. They start with a D6 in notice. Yep. Lucky, they get the luck edge to start with, which is kind of fun and cool, I think. They also have reduced pace. They also have the size -1. Same issue as before. And sure-footed, they get a D6 in athletics to start with. So they get a couple of bumps and attributes, and then a couple of negatives because of size and their pace. But I love Lucky. I like that. That's fun.
See, I don't like Lucky here, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay. Usually we agree so much.
Having that halfling luck is a very, classic thing. I just wish it was different than just the Lucky edge. I wish it was honestly, I wish it was just some other, because in Pathfinder,
it's plus
+1.
Some kind of roll or something?
Plus that you can use on a certain type of roll, or maybe just even getting... instead of getting a free luck, and this might be a little bit more powerful, but getting and I forgot that some of these didn't quite fit that +4. It might have been halflings. I'll run through this, but maybe getting conviction or something. Just something that was a little different than just the luck edge, because I generally feel that I don't know, bennies. I mean, bennies are very valuable, but you just get so many bennies, and it's just. Everybody already has bennies, so it's not really unique in that way. You know what I mean? It's not really.
I like the concept
separate.
of conviction, though. I like that. You got me thinking now. When you
there's
say
something
conviction.
else. I mean, so if I run through, so agile's worth 2, keen senses is worth 1. That's 3. Lucky's worth +2, so that's 5. Reduced pace is, I believe, a -1. That's 4. Size is 3. And then back up to 4. So yeah, they do equal that +4. So besides Lucky, I do think they did a good job representing. Again, the size thing is we've talked about is kind of you can't really get around it. But okay, cool. Finally,
boring old humans.
Boring old humans. Now, a lot of these, like we said, all of the other ones had their own little ancestral languages, which you could almost look at as a little bit of a bonus. But humans generally dominate society most of the places, so I think that's their kind of generic advantage. Humans. They start with a free edge, not a novice edge. Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, must read requirements as usual. So, yeah, novice edge. And they also gain a D6 in any attribute. So it's just, they went with it. They gave them that's equal to a +4. Humans are the most flexible of characters, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to say?
Jelly. Peanut butter and jelly of character ancestries. Yeah.
So overall, let's see. How do you think they did as far as the ancestries?
I think they captured the tropes fairly well. I there's a couple of things notwithstanding, but they did a pretty good job. I could see, sinking my teeth in any of these ancestries and feeling like that's the feel that you'd have in classic Dungeons and Dragons or
Yeah.
classic fantasy or that sort of thing. So I like them. I think they did a good job.
Yeah,
for sure.
I agree. I think they did a very good job representing Pathfinder. I do have a little bit of hang-ups on the dark vision thing, just having that, and then obviously the half-elves, like we talked about. But that's an easy homebrew. But
Yeah,
I do think that was a big mess up. But
well, and I'm coming from a little bit more of, I mean, back in my mind, I'm thinking Beyond Pathfinder is just
your
good
own
old
settings,
standard fantasy tropes, and I think they did a really good job.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
dark vision versus low light vision, I already mentioned how I'm not a fan of either, but probably a lot of hate on that, but that's just how I feel.
Cool. So let's move on. There's no added hindrances, I believe.
I didn't see any, but then hey, I skimmed a book and I missed stuff before, so
I could be wrong, but I'm almost absolutely sure there is no added hindrances. So let's move on to skills. So we're going to run through these very quickly. We do have one skill we're going to talk about a little bit more, but the big change here is that research is gone, and now research is into academics. Yeah. Now the skills thing, generally the skill changes, I don't think this was good. I actually do kind of like that they got rid of research. I actually do like that, Carl, because I always thought that research on its own was just kind of a weird skill.
but you would have folded it in somewhere else, or
well, okay. Here's I like how they put it into academics. No, so we'll describe a little bit more. So now academics, research is in academics. Now the other kind of knowledge skills they're still occult, which I wish they would have actually called arcane instead, but whatever. But now with occult will say that if it's a kind of like, if you're researching occult things, you actually use, you use the higher. So you actually would use occult if it's better than your academic skill. Which is like, oh, that's cool. But then the third kind of knowledge skill would be science. But now science doesn't have that same thing where if your science is better than your academics, you would use science. And that's where I have the issue, is that I really believe, give science that same thing. Why would you have to use academics to research something that was scientific? You know what I mean? But that's an easy fix for me, though. But now I actually like this whole system better. Even in normal Savage Worlds, I might even do it this way, where research is gone, you just use that knowledge skill as your research skill. Because, I don't know. It would always felt a little weird to me.
Well,
I don't know. How do you feel?
When you're playing the game and you asking for a roll, you're always going, well, is that a research? Is that an academics? Is that a research? Is that an academic?
Yeah.
So
this simplifies it in a really good way. So I like what they did, but then I thought there was kind of a miss that science didn't get that same thing. And again, I'm not really sure if, because it seems like survival. I mean, I guess survival wouldn't, because nature is such a big thing in Pathfinder. Like I'm coming from more of a 2E mindset, but like arcane, occult, religion, and survival. And nature are like the big knowledge skills, and society. But the way that you're wrapped up, I guess science would be nature, but I think a lot of natural people would use survival instead. So there's definitely some weird stuff here with Pathfinder, with the Pathfinder kind of stuff coming over. And then now academics is just so much stronger. In a lot of our games, academics seems kind of weak-ish. But now, science is not going to be the biggest thing in Pathfinder in a fantasy game. And you have, history. You have society. All that stuff's going to be in academics. The research is in academics. So now academics became way stronger. So there's kind of a lot. I like some stuff and I don't like some stuff there. Right? I don't know. How do you feel about this?
Whenever a skill gets a little too overloaded, then it becomes the point dump, because it's got so much utility. And I think that was an argument when SWADE even was coming out. They took throwing and they took swimming and they took things like that, and they shoved it into athletics, and a lot of people were going, well, now athletics is just too much. You're just too much there. So we've got to be careful that academics doesn't become the same thing. But you know what? I'm kind of a classic rules as written kind of person, and I can play this either way. I can run it. That's the important part. I don't think it's going to hold me back or anything. Okay. I know Pathfinder. I don't know if there's much, like you said. I don't know if there's much science in Pathfinder. I mean, is it just tinkerers and stuff like that? And so.
Yeah, I think generally, like again, I'm coming from more of that. I'm trying to remember from 1E, but I'm coming from more of the 2E mindset. But there's like, I think craft is used for like engineering or something like that, or architecture, something like that would be using craft, I believe, or maybe history, if it was like, actually there's no history. Yeah, so I just really don't know 1E skills that well.
Okay, well, it's fine. I don't think we have to dwell on it too much.
I think in 1E, they have knowledge. That's what it is. It's their specific knowledge. So there's specific like geography, history, nature. Those are all broken up within knowledge. So I don't know. I definitely feel academics becomes too strong because it also has religion, and now religion's maybe not a big deal in like a more modern game, but in this it's huge, right? So
right.
I definitely feel like give science that same thing, ability. Anyway, so there's that, and then the kind of other big change is that now, languages. This has the normal setting rule for language, where, which is important because there's all these different, ancestries. There's all these different creatures that might speak a specific language. So for people who don't know that, in the language rules is that you get half of your smarts in like skill points to languages, and then you start fluent in all of your native languages. Now, the big change they did here, and this is something that me and Carl talked about that we don't like, but we have a kind of a fix to it, is that when you're trying to do persuasion with a certain language, you use the lowest of your language skill or persuasion. Now, this doesn't apply to your native languages. So something like if you're an elf, common, and elven, it wouldn't apply. Because just so you know that the way languages work, and hopefully you throw this on screen, Carl, is that it goes from a D4, D6, D8, D10, and D12, and each of those, it's more than just like what you roll. They have like very specific things that they do. So a D4 is that you can read and write and speak common words and phrases. A D6 is you can carry on kind of like a broken conversation. D8 is fluent. D10 is you can mimic other dialects, and a D12 is you can masterfully recite important literary or oral works. Now, I just have a problem with this whole thing anyways. I really do. Like, the whole you can masterfully recite oral works, like, that should be academics or performance. I don't see at all why that's in the language. So
just because you can speak the language really well doesn't mean you're educated in...
Yeah, the poems. I know English, but I can't recite all these poems. I mean, I'm not an English major, but so I don't know. The whole thing is weird, and I don't like that. If it's not your native language, but you're fluent, you would get penalized for not, for having like if your persuasion to D12 and you have a D8 in Sylvan, right? You should be fine. So here's our fix for this. First of all, is we kind of raise everything up. So a D4 would be you can only speak common words and phrases. Yeah. A D6 would then be you can read, write, and speak common words and phrases. The D8 would become that halting conversation. A D10 would be fluent, and a D12 would be you can mimic other dialects. And then the other rule would be that if you're fluent, so I do like that whole limited thing where the die, you take the lowest. But that only goes up to fluent, which is now a D10, if that makes sense. Right. So if you're fluent in Sylvan, you have that D10 in Sylvan, but you have a D12 in Persuasion, you're not going to take the penalty. Just because it's just a little weird to me, right, Carl? This was the fix, or
yeah. I think so. Essentially, just to summarize, we're scaling everything down.
Yeah,
one step basically, and so once you're fluent, you're already at a D10. Then, when you're when you can speak fluently, you're at a D10 as opposed to a D8, and so that gets rid of a lot of the problems that we have with the way the language proficiency works with the language smarts. Again, back in my D&D days, I don't know if I worried too much about its languages. So, but since this is now the baseline for persuasion, takes advantage of this, it's a big deal. Then it becomes a bigger deal. Yeah, if you can speak to somebody fluently, you should be able to. Persuade them just as well as because you're fluent. You're not halting. You're not. You're trying to persuade someone and they don't get what you're saying. But if you're fluent, they get what you're saying, and that should be the base then.
I think at the very least, even if you don't change the way the language block works, the way the proficiencies work, just do it like contextually, like we said, if you keep D8 fluently, don't penalize for someone, but maybe even if it's their native language, if the person's speaking a weird dialect, like if you're in some corner of the country that speaks a really strange dialect, then you could penalize everybody for not having a D10, even the people who are native speakers. So I think that's kind of maybe even the simpler and safer way is just kind of do it contextually. Still, if they're not speaking a weird dialect, if you're fluent, doesn't matter if it's your native language or not, don't penalize. So that's our kind of take on this. Otherwise, languages are a big thing when there's like all these exotic languages, and it's really important for creature types and stuff like that. So, from a Pathfinder standpoint, it's good, but maybe in a normal fantasy game, Carl, you probably wouldn't maybe go with this as much.
Again, it's just my experience. It didn't come up a lot because persuasion wasn't a thing. Yeah, people would you'd be doing persuasion or intimidation just from you can do it. But I think that's the lack of sophistication that some of my earlier games in D&D had. I think this adds some more interest that you can get to that you couldn't before. And
it's important for a lot of the creatures that we'll be seeing in bestiary. Okay. I think we have to move on because we're actually already at like 42 minutes and we want to get into these class edges.
Okay.
So let's keep going. And we'll have some links below, I think. Maybe, Carl, that'd be good. But let's get into class edges. I'm going to run through how they work very quickly because we really want to get through these. So as we said before, when you start the game, a new character gets a class edge for free. You can choose not to take one and get a background or a professional edge instead. But the very basic way they work is that a class edge, you get that free one, and then they have other edges in a tree. And right now there's only one. So each class tree only has one per rank up to heroic. So basically there's the initial class edge, and then there's going to be 3 more after that. So there's a total of 4 edges for all the different classes. Now, the only other caveat to these are that per rank, you can only take the main class edge or prestige edge. We'll talk about those later, but you can only take one of them per rank. So you couldn't take the first fighter edge, the main fighter class edge, and then also take the main paladin edge in the same rank. But if you had already unlocked those, you couldn't do that. Yeah, if you've already unlocked them, then you can take the other edges that they unlock. You can take as many of those as you're able to, fitting the normal prerequisites. So I don't know if that made sense, but that's kind of how they've handled multi-classing. Now, the only other caveat to multi-classing has to do with powers, where if you have and this is for if you take an arcane background, getting it through a class edge, or getting it through the normal, taking the normal arcane background, you get that increase to your arcane skill, but you don't get extra power points. So if you already have an arcane background of any type, you don't add the extra power points that you get when you get a new arcane background. Power edges apply across all of your arcane backgrounds, but specific class edge abilities don't only apply to the class arcane background. So if you're a wizard, and wizards get their own arcane, their own type of spellcasting, and then you get some a +1 to spellcasting rolls. that would not apply to your sorcerer powers, or that would not apply to your cleric powers. If that makes sense. So that's the only kind of upfront. Let's run through these. I don't know.
Right.
Are we going to be able to run all through all these, or we might just have to go long? I don't know, but let's.
Well, if we go long, we go long.
We
I
go
guess.
long, yeah.
We're at 40 minutes. It's going to be another 40 minutes to go through these.
Well, let's do it.
I don't know.
I'm doing this. So cool.
And if I have to split this video up, I'll split it here, everybody.
It's a savage world, strange as a weird war. It's a savage world, classics to explore. It's a savage world, in the land of the dead.